The day I found out my own brother had forged my mother's signature. I was standing in a lawyer's office in a pencil skirt I'd borrowed from my coworker, because I didn't even own anything appropriate to wear to something like that. I hadn't slept in 3 days. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. And the attorney, a thin man with reading glasses perched at the end of his nose, slid a document across the mahogany desk and said, very calmly, like he was reading a grocery list, that according to the will on file, I had been left nothing. Nothing. Not the house in Decatur I grew up in. Not the savings account my mother had been building since before I was born. Not even the jewelry she'd promised me since I was 8 years old. The gold bracelet her own mother had passed down to her, the one she wore every single day of her life until the hospital took it off her wrist. Nothing. I remember the fluorescent light humming above my head. I remember the attorney clearing his throat. And I remember thinking, very clearly, in that strange way your mind gets sharp when something terrible is happening, that something was deeply, deeply wrong. My mother raised my brother and me alone. Our father left when I was 4, and my brother was 7, and she never made us feel the loss of him. She worked double shifts at the hospital where she was a charge nurse for 22 years. She packed our lunches, she showed up to every school play, she drove me to my college orientation and cried the whole way home. She was the kind of woman people described as strong. But she was more than that. She was specific. She had opinions about everything. She thought pineapple on pizza was an abomination. She kept a little notepad by the kitchen phone even after everyone stopped using landlines. She sang to herself while she cooked, always slightly off-key, always unbothered by it. Her name was Vivienne. I called her Mom. She had a stroke the previous April. It wasn't the first, she'd had a minor one 2 years before, and we'd adjusted, adapted. She slowed down. She retired. She started letting me come over on Sundays to help with things she couldn't manage on her own. And during those Sunday visits, she talked to me about her life, about what she wanted, about the house, about her accounts, about what she called her arrangements. She told me she'd updated her will after the first stroke. She told me she was leaving the house to both of us equally, and that her savings, just over $200,000, the result of decades of discipline, would be split down the middle. She told me she wanted the bracelet to go to me. She said, and I remember this word for word because I wrote it in my journal that same night, I trust you to keep the family together, Ray. You've always been the one who shows up. Her name for me was Ray. My full name is Raylin, but nobody called me that except telemarketers and my brother when he was angry with me. My brother's name is Donovan. He's 3 years older than me, and for most of my life I thought we were close. He lives 40 minutes from where we grew up, has a good job in logistics, owns a nice house in the suburbs. Wife, Cheryl. They have 2 kids. On the surface, everything about his life looks fine. Stable, normal, but money does something to people. I've seen it happen in other families and I always thought, not us, we're not like that, we're close, we're the ones who stayed. I was wrong. Mom's had her second stroke on a Wednesday morning in February. I got the call while I was at work. I'm a physical therapist, I work at an outpatient clinic, and I left in the middle of a session. I drove to Piedmont Hospital with my hands at 10 and 2 and my heart somewhere in my throat. She was alive, she was stable, but she'd lost significant function on her left side, and the doctors told us that recovery would be longer this time, more uncertain. She was moved to a rehabilitation facility after 10 days. I was there every other day. My brother came the first week, then less, then he started calling instead of visiting, and the calls got shorter. I didn't say anything about it. I told myself he had kids, he had work, the drive was long. I made excuses for him the way I'd been doing my whole adult life without realizing it. What I didn't know was that during the weeks I wasn't there, Donovan was. Not to visit, not to hold her hand or read to her, or bring her the sweet tea she liked from the place on Peachtree. He was there to talk to her about paperwork. I found that out much later. At the time, all I knew was that my mother was getting weaker, that the rehab facility was expensive, and that I was the one fielding calls from her insurance company, her bank, her doctors. I was the one organizing her bills, forwarding her mail, managing her affairs. I was the one who stayed. She passed away on a Thursday in late April, 11 weeks after the second stroke. I was with her. I held her hand. She didn't speak much in those final days, but at one point she looked at me and said, very quietly, "The bracelet is in the blue box, baby. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." I told her I knew. I told her I loved her. And then she closed her eyes. 2 weeks after the funeral, Donovan called me and said, we needed to meet with an attorney about the estate. I said of course. I assumed this was routine, the standard process of probate, transferring the house, dividing the accounts the way Mom had described. I borrowed my coworker's pencil skirt. I drove downtown. And that's when the attorney slid that document across the desk. The will on file had been signed 14 months ago. Not the updated will my mother had described to me on those Sunday afternoons. This one, the one Donovan had submitted, was dated from before her first stroke, before her updates, before all those conversations we'd had. And in this version, everything went to Donovan. The house, the savings, all of it. I was mentioned once, in a single line that left me the contents of her china cabinet. The china cabinet. I couldn't speak. I sat in that chair and I looked at my brother across the table and he didn't look at me. He was looking at his hands. And I knew, in the way you know things before you can articulate them, that something had happened, something deliberate. The attorney asked if I had any questions. I said I needed a moment. I stepped out into the hallway, sat down on a bench outside the elevator bank, and I cried. Not dramatically, just quietly, in that depleted way you cry when you've already been crying for 2 weeks and your body doesn't have much left. I called my best friend Tamsin, and I said, "Something is wrong with this will," she said. "Then you need to fight it." I didn't know anything about contesting a will. I didn't know what undue influence meant in a legal context, or what a signature comparison could reveal, or how to request medical records to establish someone's cognitive state at the time of signing. I had to learn all of it. And I had to learn it fast, because probate doesn't wait for you to catch your breath. I hired my own attorney, a woman named Josephine, referred by a friend of Tamsin's, with a calm manner and a reputation for estate litigation. She was thorough and practical and did not sugarcoat anything. She told me the will Donovan had filed was legally valid on its face, but that didn't mean it was legitimate. She told me we needed evidence, a paper trail, witnesses, medical documentation. I started digging. The first thing I found was timing. The will Donovan filed was signed on a Tuesday in December. I pulled my mother's calendar. She kept a paper planner, the kind with the little tabs for each month, and that Tuesday she had 2 entries. A doctor's appointment in the morning, and an entry in the afternoon that said, in her handwriting, "D coming over. D Donovan." I sat with that calendar in my lap for a long time. Then I called the doctor's office and requested her records from that visit. Under HIPAA, as her estate representative, the role I'd assumed by default since I was the one managing everything, I was entitled to them. The notes from that appointment indicated that my mother had reported increased confusion and short-term memory difficulty. The physician had noted, in clinical language, that she was showing signs of mild cognitive impairment and recommended a neurological evaluation. She was not at her clearest that day, and that was the day she signed. Then I went to the rehab facility and I talked to the nurses who had cared for her after the second stroke. One of them, a sweet, soft-spoken woman who had worked nights, told me that my brother had visited more than I knew, that he'd come in after visiting hours once, and that my mother had seemed confused and upset afterward. She said she hadn't thought much of it at the time. She thought it was just family grief. But she remembered it. Josephine said we were building a case. What happened next, I didn't expect. My mother had a sister, my Aunt Cecily. They'd had a falling out years ago, one of those family ruptures that happens over money or pride or some misunderstanding that calcifies over time, and they hadn't spoken in nearly a decade. I knew she existed the way you know distant geography exists, as a fact, not as a presence. I had her number in my phone from years ago and I'd never used it. I called her because I was looking for anything. I called her not expecting much. She answered on the second ring. When I explained what had happened, haltingly, prepared for her to be skeptical or indifferent, she was silent for a moment. Then she said, "I need you to listen to me carefully." She told me that 3 months before my mother's first stroke, before any of this started, my mother had called her. That they had spoken, tentatively, after years of silence, and that during that call, my mother had said something Aunt Cecily had never forgotten. She said my mother told her that she was worried about Donovan, that he'd been asking questions about the will for months, that she felt pressured, that she had told him explicitly that she intended to update her will to protect both her children equally, and that he had not taken it well. My mother had reached out to her estranged sister because she needed someone outside the immediate family to know. Someone who couldn't be pressured. Aunt Cecily had kept that to herself for years, because she didn't know what to do with it. She hadn't wanted to create more conflict. She'd told herself maybe it would work out. And then she'd heard about my mother's death through a mutual cousin, and she'd wondered, but she hadn't known how to reach me, and she'd been waiting, she said, for someone to ask. I sat down on the kitchen floor when she said that. Right there on the tile, phone pressed to my ear, just trying to breathe. "I should have called you sooner," she said. "I'm sorry. I told her I needed her to tell Josephine everything she'd just told me. She said yes. Josephine filed a formal challenge to the will on the grounds of undue influence and my mother's diminished cognitive capacity at the time of signing. She submitted the medical records. She submitted a signed affidavit from Aunt Cecily. She arranged for a handwriting expert to examine the signature. And what came back was something I had not anticipated. The expert could not definitively confirm the signature was forged, but she noted significant inconsistencies. My mother had a very particular way of signing her name. She had a looping V that was almost a circle, and she dotted her I with a small dash instead of a round dot. The signature on the will had neither of those features. It was close, but it wasn't right. Josephine took that to the probate court along with everything else. Donovan hired his own attorney. He called me twice during this period and I didn't answer. His wife, Cheryl, sent me a text that said I was tearing the family apart over money, that I should be ashamed of myself, that our mother would be devastated. I read it standing in my kitchen, at 11 o'clock at night, still in my work clothes, exhausted in a way that went beyond physical. And I thought about my mother sitting in that rehab facility while her son came to pressure her. I thought about her telling me, "You've always been the one who shows up." I thought about the blue box. I put the phone down and I didn't respond. A few days later, I went to my mother's house, which was technically in legal limbo pending the will contest, and I went into her bedroom and I found the blue box on the shelf in her closet, exactly where she'd said it would be. Inside was the bracelet, and underneath the bracelet, folded in a piece of tissue paper, was a handwritten note. It was in my mother's handwriting, her actual handwriting, the looping V, the little dash dot, all of it. It said, "For Raylan. Your grandmother wore this every day. I have worn it every day. Now it belongs to you. Don't let anyone convince you that you are worth less than you are. I love you to the end of everything. Mom?" There was no date on the note. I don't know when she wrote it. But it was there, and it was hers, and I held it in that quiet bedroom and I let myself cry in a way I hadn't let myself cry since the funeral. I cried for a long time, and then I put the bracelet on my wrist and I left. The probate court proceedings took 4 months. 4 months of documents and depositions and hearings and waiting. 4 months of fielding calls from relatives who had opinions, of avoiding family group chats, of eating cereal for dinner because I was too tired to cook. 4 months of watching my brother across various conference tables and thinking about the person I had believed him to be for 37 years of my life. Josephine was careful to prepare me for multiple outcomes. She said we had a strong case but not a certain one. She said estate litigation is unpredictable. She said I needed to be prepared for disappointment. I told her I was already disappointed. I just wanted the truth to be on record. The judge ultimately found in my favor on the grounds of undue influence. The ruling noted that my mother's documented cognitive state at the time of signing, combined with the testimony of Aunt Cecily, the inconsistencies in the signature, and the absence of an independent attorney present at the signing, all supported the conclusion that the will had not been executed freely and without external pressure. The original estate plan, the equal split my mother had described to me on those Sunday afternoons, was restored. The house was to be divided. The savings account would be split, and I would handle the personal property, including the jewelry. I was sitting in Josephine's office when she called me with the decision. I thanked her, and I hung up, and I sat in my car in the parking garage for probably 20 minutes before I could drive. I didn't feel triumphant. I want to be honest about that. I felt tired. I felt sad. I felt a complicated grief that I still haven't fully untangled. Grief for my mother, but also grief for the brother I thought I had. For the version of our family that turned out to be something I had constructed in my own head. Donovan and I have not spoken since the ruling. I don't know if we ever will. His wife still occasionally posts things on social media that feel directed at me. Vague quotes about betrayal and greed, stuff like that. And I've learned to scroll past without engaging. It's not easy. It's actually one of the harder parts of all of this. Because there's no clean ending, no dramatic confrontation where everything gets said. Just silence, and the slow work of rebuilding a version of your life that doesn't include the people you expected to be in it. But here's what I do have. I have Aunt Cecily, who I have now spoken to more in the past year than in the previous decade combined. We have lunch once a month at a little place near her apartment in Midtown. We talk about my mother, her sister, in ways that feel healing, not just painful. We are learning each other, slowly, the way people do when they come back to each other after a long absence. She brought me a photo last month that I had never seen before. My mother at 23, laughing at something off camera, looking so young it made my chest ache. I have the house in Decatur, or at least my half of it. Donovan and I are working through a mediator to handle the property, and it is tedious and unpleasant, but it is moving forward. I go there sometimes, even now, before anything is finalized. I sit in my mother's kitchen, and I make coffee the way she made it, just a little too strong. I look out the window at the backyard where she grew tomatoes every summer. I feel her there, and I have the bracelet. I haven't taken it off since the day I found it. I wear it when I'm doing laundry, and when I'm seeing patients at the clinic, and when I'm asleep. My mother wore it every day. Her mother wore it every day before that. I don't know what my grandmother looked like, only what I've seen in photographs. But when I look at the bracelet on my wrist, I feel something that I can only describe as continuity. Like I am part of a line of women who kept going through hard things, and didn't let the hard things become who they were. My mother believed that about me before I believed it about myself. She told me I was the one who showed up. For a long time I thought that was just something kind she was saying. Now I think she meant it as a kind of instruction, not a compliment, but a direction. A way of telling me who to keep being, even when showing up was the hardest thing imaginable. I am 38 years old. I live in a small house in East Atlanta that I rent with my friend Timson. We moved in together last year after her divorce, and it is, unexpectedly, one of the best living situations I've ever had. We cook dinner most nights. We watch bad television. We talk about our mothers, both of whom are gone now, and we talk about what we want the rest of our lives to look like. I think about my mother all the time. I think about her off-key singing and her kitchen notepad and the way she called me Ray, just Ray, like the word itself was enough. I think about the fact that she reached out to her estranged sister because she needed someone to know the truth, and that Aunt Cecily held on to that for years, and that somehow it found its way to me exactly when I needed it. I don't fully know what to make of that. But I don't think it was nothing. If you've ever had someone you love betray you, or if you've had to fight for something that should have been yours, then you already know that the hardest part isn't the conflict. The hardest part is afterward. When you've won, or lost, or landed somewhere in between, and you have to figure out how to carry it, how to let it change you without letting it harden you, how to grieve the person you thought someone was while still finding a way to move forward. I'm still figuring that out. Most days, I think I'm doing okay. I press my thumb to the bracelet when I need steadying. It works, most of the time. And on the days it doesn't, I go to my mother's kitchen, and I make her 2 strong coffee, and I sit with the quiet, and I try to be the person she believed I was. That's all I know how to do, but I think it might be enough.